There's a lot of social issues which don't get media attention for some reason, because this fast fashion brand has some sort of influence in terms of the stuff which we wear. It gets media attention. It gets attention from people on social media. But the things which may be impacting certain people to a larger degree get no freaking coverage. Welcome back to the DWD podcast. This one's a little bit unique because it's a digital exclusive. This is not going up on the podcast. This is not going up on Spotify, not going up on Apple Podcasts. This is going up on
YouTube and wherever else we decide to put it.
Yeah.
But we wanted to start this kind of format to allow us to have more expression.
Especially in terms of like current events and stuff like that. This is way less scripted. We didn't organize any conversation. This is super impromptu. But for this episode, we are going to be talking a little bit about the Shein controversy. I think that's how you pronounce the name. Recently, there's been a lot of hubbub on social media, especially about this jewelry brand, which a lot of girls and guys purchase jewelry from. It's a fast fashion brand by the name of Shein, and they posted, or they have on their website, a pendant that looks similar to the Nazi swastika. Yeah, that's really just what it.
But the distinction, and this is kind of where things get more complicated in this moment, is that it's actually the Hindu symbol that was ripped off by Nazi Germany for their own purposes in forms of white supremacy and anti-Semitism.
Yeah.
So that's where there's been a bit of a complication in this issue, where a lot of people are calling out the company, rightfully so, by the way, because it is very insensitive in a Western context to use this symbol.
You know, we've seen this before, though. We've seen this. I remember last year there was an H&M issue that was very similar.
Yeah, I think Zara had an issue.
Zara had an issue too. This is super prominent in fast fashion. One thing which we truly need to understand is that fast fashion is a lot of times socially and racially and culturally intolerant, because it's fast fashion. They move quickly. It's less thought involved in terms of their production of the product. Though another thing which we have to realize, or which I've taken note of, is that it's intolerant on both sides. Westernized culture and Eastern culture, if that's even a thing, has completely different interpretations of the pendant or the symbol. And so, yes, from a Western standpoint, the symbol or the pendant which they had up on their website, it's intolerant, and it brings back
generations
of anti-Semitism and oppression. But from an Eastern standpoint, if you look to like Hindu culture, maybe that symbol in a different orientation, tilted a little bit in a different degree, is associated with peace and tranquility. And so on both sides, it's somewhat intolerant to call out somebody as a racist brand or a racist person, or not even racist, but anti-Semitic brand or anti-Semitic person.
Can we talk about how crazy that is, though, that from a historical point, that Nazi Germany took a symbol that meant peace and utilized it for their own purposes? Part of that, I think, comes down to the fact that they believe the Aryan race was white, blonde hair, blue eyes, which is a little weird, because original Aryans came from a similar location as like where Indians are now. Yeah. That's kind of the migration period. But they stole this symbol, basically, co-opted it, and, as one form that is a form of white supremacy, co-opting these, cultural symbols and religious symbols, using it for the purpose then of hatred. And now we're having this greater conversation in light of a lot of questions about race with the Black Lives Matter movement. Now there's a lot of questions about anti-Semitism. I think it's funny, as two Jewish boys sitting here who both had bar mitzvah and grew up culturally Jewish. I don't know necessarily how much from a religious sense. Listening and seeing this conversation, it's so fast how these social movements are moving. Yeah,
and a lot of times the image gets perverted. I don't even think it gets perverted, but it changes.
I have a problem with how conversations are going on right now, because everything's put online. And swiping up on someone's story, the problem with a conversation like that, and we recently spoke with...
Swipe up culture still isn't a conversation, which is what people don't realize. Like signing a change.org petition, that's amazing. I love that. We all love it. We're trying to promote some sort of change in whatever way we can and substantiate it, given the global climate which we're living in. But at the same time, like, it still is severing conversation. It's still it's not severing, but it's not promoting it, if that sort of makes sense.
It's one start to a conversation, but it should not be, in my opinion, where conversations are being had, because it is too easy to misunderstand someone. And that's why I think formats like these, where there's dialogue, is much more important. Mm-hmm. So bring things offline. You want to have these conversations, call them up. It's daunting at first to call someone up for a conversation like this, but I actually think that you'll get a lot more out of it. That's been my experience.
Though back to the Shein pendant situation,
yeah,
I find it somewhat ironic how the world is going through some crazy stuff right now. Too many things to even count on my 10 fingers, right? Mm-hmm. Some may argue 8 because I have thumbs, but whatever. That's a whole other conversation. No, but it's interesting. You know, there's people dying in Yemen. There's people dying on the streets, maybe a few blocks away from where a lot of people in America live. But the one thing which triggers them is that a fast fashion brand which posted some somewhat intolerant piece of merchandise.
It's just tone deaf.
Yeah, that's what I'm like. It actually astounds me if that's what triggers the person. Given that it's like there's a war right next to you, quite literally, and you're focused on the only thing which impacts maybe your life. And I understand that maybe not everybody is impacted by the stuff which is happening right now. Not everybody has coronavirus. Not everybody's impacted to the same degree that some other people are. Mm-hmm. But to be that intolerant and to be triggered by something so minuscule when there's bigger problems out there, literally famine, homelessness, and dissonance, just a political dissonance, social dissonance, lack of connection. It angers me.
I have a problem with weighing these injustices, though, in the qualifying statement that you make, where you make this out to be something that's like a small instance.
No,
I guess it's important to weigh it because there are certain things that deserve our priority.
You can't tell me though that, like, sure, both of them are impactful.
Yeah.
Yes, I totally agree with that.
But to different degrees.
But to different degrees. Like, I kind of follow this aspect of, I don't know if it's utilitarianism. I don't think it totally is. But if there's somebody, like, dying in front of you, and if there's a person who's, like, somewhat sick, mm-hmm. like, who are you going to treat first, sort of thing? Like, if people are literally dying in another country, in your own country, and you can give 3 shits about it, and you sign a petition, which is great, but, like, you do nothing else for it, you probably aren't even posting anything anymore. It's out of your mind. That was like a trend maybe last week, but now we're on to a new thing. But the reaction is so different in terms of something like a jewelry brand. I understand they're both impactful. I understand. I totally get it. But it feels intolerant from my perspective, at least, when you see such profound issues in your own local community.
And the thing you focus on is fast fashion troubles.
I get it. Like, they're both bad. We should both call it out, and we should all.
Because it's not zero sum, and I agree that we should be focusing on crises like Yemen, which have gone on for 4 or 5 years. I'm not particularly accurate on my date or starting date, and by we I mean Americans play a large role in why this crisis has gone on for so long, and it's a humanitarian crisis that gets no media attention. And to that point,
gets me angry. There's literally slavery in some parts of Africa still, and I'm like, what are we doing?
Not even just Africa, bro. You think slavery doesn't exist in the States, but it does.
What?
Yes.
What are you talking about?
People who are imprisoned get forced labor.
Okay, yeah, I guess you can interpret that. But there's a lot of social issues which don't get media attention for some reason, because this fast fashion brand has some sort of influence in terms of the stuff which we wear. It gets media attention. It gets attention from people on social media. But the things which may be impacting certain people to a larger degree get no freaking coverage. But like the fact that people who are imprisoned, the fact that people who are imprisoned now don't have a right to vote in certain states.
Yeah,
that's ridiculous. That's ridiculous.
I think we have to ask a deeper question here of why does that happen? Recognizing the fact that there are objectively some issues that deserve our priority that we do not give enough attention to, and that's what we've noticed in this moment with Black Lives Matter in particular, where they've been able to generate so much media attention. Mm-hmm. It comes down to what we consume. It comes down to what are we being fed in terms of media, because that is the only way that we can learn about things. That is the same way I would argue a lot of troubles occur in this moment by the fact, just in this conversation, right? The inability to nuance out a conversation comes directly from the fact of just some of us are ignorant. And ignorance is,
such facts,
we
though.
ought
It
to
is
be
such a
blamed.
fact.
We ought to be blamed for our ignorance, but also we ought to hold that in juxtaposition with a recognition that literally the system is skewed to some extent against us having awareness about these issues, because systems of power, aka our government, want us to, for example, continue to fund Saudi Arabians who are directly involved in this Yemeni crisis to continue an act of producing arms and, funneling our money to them, or getting money for funneling arms to them. And so part of it really just does come down to those in power control narratives, right? Our history is written by those who win, not those by those who lose. And unfortunately, the result of that is, number one, a lot of what we have learned is racist. A lot of what we have learned is capitalist. A lot of what we have learned just reinforces dominations of power instead of subverts them. So the question becomes, how do you depolarize those types of issues? And I think it ultimately comes down to doing the hard research and not just looking at face value and nuancing out every single thing that you look at.
Because a lot of people act quick, very quick. Even I can only speak from my own experience, but like looking at social media, people were very quick to say, disgusting, terrible, this brand should be canceled, I'm never purchasing from them again, which is like, yeah, that's your position.
People,
and
you're
totally
deserve
allowed
to have that feeling.
It's totally justifiable.
Yeah.
I agree with it. If you don't want to purchase from a brand, that's your
prerogative.
That's your prerogative if you want to do that. But at the same time, you see people who one day they say that, and then literally 2 hours later, people bring up another element where it's like, oh, I was wrong. I acted too quickly. Maybe there's some part of this conversation which I was missing. And so like that quick action without actual digestion, it's like, are you going to eat food and not digest it, or are you going to eat food, digest it, and then let it pass through your system?
Yeah. That's the problem with this moment, because we have, and it's the funniest thing, we assume these things right here are essential to our lives now, but generations in the past never had this, and they were perfectly fine, albeit there were troubles, of course, and we're dealing with the ramifications of things that they left behind. But we assume that this is where all of our conversation should be had now. I would argue that this is part of the problem. I would argue that our consistent use of social media, and many of us are to blame for this, is part of the problem, because it has become so quick to respond without first digesting, as you were saying, and comprehending what's going on. Now, I would agree with those who might criticize to say that this gives us first strike advantage on terrible issues like we're seeing now. Yeah. I would not imagine I would know anything about the Shein, swastika issue.
I still don't know much, but I'm just speaking from my understanding. My perspective may change, but just to preface, we definitely have to preface by saying, like, no side is wholeheartedly correct.
I don't know if any side is wholeheartedly correct ever, and that's why we don't live in a perfect society, right? Because we have to go through this process of hashing out details and nuancing things out. We cannot stay in a system, in my opinion, that remains dogmatic and assumes that things are just the way that they are.
But I feel like social media perpetuates that sort of stuff. Like dogmatism is huge nowadays.
100%, and because we think that the things that we see online are exactly as they are. As an example of that,
you're gonna bring up TikTok?
I mean, I could, but what I would say is, when you see your friends happy online, smiling, hanging out with their friends, you assume that they're happy. If you ask your friends who are posting those things if they're truly happy, literally ask them, are you truly happy? You would be so surprised at how many of them would say, no, I just post those things because they make me feel good.
I saw a video recently, and it was like, this is what depression looks like, and it was just a bunch of comedians who died from either drug abuse or killing themselves, or influential people who died from those reasons, and they all had a smile on their face. And I was, the contrast, there's a lack of rawness. Like, we're recording this right now. 5 minutes ago, we decided, hey, we're gonna record, and that's what happened. This is all raw. We're not editing this. This is true. We're not trying to mess around. Asher's texting on his phone right now for all this. Like, this is so real.
I have a call that's about to happen, so I'm just telling her I'm going to be a little late.
It's all good. But this is so real. And so that lack of, like, truth. I literally have people calling me or messaging me every once in a while, and they seem so great on social media. They have the followers, they have the likes, they have the comments, they have the engagement, but they call me saying that they feel depressed and anxious. I don't know what to do. What am I supposed to do? If you're living a double life, like, what do you expect? Why don't you just be truthful to the public? You know what I mean? Like,
truth and honesty is difficult.
Yeah.
That's been true since day one. I think that's why we appreciate so many people who are authentic now. I think that's why the Joe Rogans of the world do well.
It's just
not even because
unedited, man.
Not even because he is, he speaks a lot about politics, but he probably would never call himself a politician or a political scientist.
He's a human.
Exactly. And we all have opinions.
A lot of people aren't humans.
We all have opinions. We all have things that we're passionate about. And that's the beauty of it in this moment as well, is that we can turn that into something that's viable in terms of spreading ideas, but also potentially monetarily. But it can also be dangerous at the same time, because we have to remember that not everyone is credible in the things that they say, especially in the case of spreading information online. It is very easy to look at things as face value. Point blank done, boom, 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 that's finished. We like to keep things simple, which makes sense. We like 2 + 2 = 4. What we don't like, and what I've been talking to a lot of my friends about it, what we don't like
is the gray area.
We hate it so much.
We love black and white. We hate gray. I learned that from my English teacher this year, and I thought that truly resonates with all of us. Like, the gray zone, the reason why we hate it, in my opinion at least, is because it's confusing, right? No side is wholeheartedly correct, like what you said before. Mm-hmm. But because of that, it can drive people insane. This is why philosophers like jump off of bridges and like do shrooms and like crazy stuff, because they're stuck in the gray zone to the point where it consumes their life. And it's wild, but I think that there's something which we could learn from the gray. Obviously, overconsumption.
There's a lot. That's where the actual knowledge comes from. It doesn't come from assuming things are just black and white.
But then again, like, overconsumption is never good in any aspect of life. But diving a little bit into the gray zone, figuring out, just for example, this jewelry issue, we chose to get into the gray zone. We may get a bit of backlash for it, but like, I think we'll be better human beings for understanding that it's not such a polarized issue, or there's not such a polarized ending.
Yeah, and this is just our initial reaction in this moment as we're talking about things. And even as you're listening to this, if this ever goes out there, I urge you to not take what we say as face value at all as well, and to engage with us in this conversation, because that is how we can learn. That is the power of platforms like the ones we're using. We can crowdsource information and knowledge instead of reinforcing our ideas and forcing ourselves into echo chambers. So that's where we will leave it as I try and, use our new equipment. Thanks for listening to this. We really appreciate you tuning in to all of our stuff. If you are new to this whole setup, I'm Asher. This is Joey. This is our podcast, but typically we interview people and have conversations, not directly our spontaneous ideas and reactions to different topics. But if you enjoy us talking about these issues, let us know. We'd be happy to do more of it. We stay a little bit more contextual to the times. That is all from us, at least for today. We will see you very soon, and make sure to go follow us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, all the likes for more content.
Peace.